All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us either in person or virtually for tonight's presentation. My name is Mark Klapach-Mathias, and I'm here representing two of the sponsors for tonight, including the UW River Falls Office of Sustainability and Hope for Creation. One of our other sponsors for this Sustainability Speaker Series is Powerful Choices, and then, of course, our host, the River Falls Public Library. We have two more events coming up in the Sustainability Speaker Series this year. The next one is on Tuesday, April 11th at 6:30 p.m., and it will be virtual only. It will be Dr. Larry Rasmussen speaking about his book, The Planet You Inherit, Letters to My Grandchildren, When Uncertainty's a Sure Thing. Specifically, that book addresses the future of climate change, global citizenship, democracy, and legacy. There's no need to read the book prior to that presentation. He'll be sharing some excerpts from it during his presentation and just being interviewed and answering some questions about it. So again, that one is on Tuesday, April 11th at 6:30 p.m., virtual only. The other event in the Sustainability Speaker Series is also virtual only. It will be Wednesday, April 26th at 6 p.m., and it will feature Kyle White. The topic is Social, Cultural, Environmental, and Economic Importance of Freshwater Access and Protection from a Traditional Ecological Knowledge Perspective. So again, that one is on Wednesday, April 26th at 6 p.m., featuring Kyle White, virtual only. And then one other event that I just wanted to mention is coming up on Earth Day, April 22nd. River Falls will be hosting the second annual Earth Fest event at Glen Park from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. We have over 70 vendors signed up to be there with information and activities. We have other children and family activities. There will be live music, free food, all sorts of sustainable giveaways. The library will have some posters available starting sometime next week for that event. But again, that's coming up on Earth Day, April 22nd from 12 to 4 p.m. And that is again, Earth Fest. So without further ado, I will hand things over to Diana for our seed starting presentation. So Diana.
All right, thanks, Mark. So happy to be here again. The River Falls Public Library and the Sustainability Series is a great asset to the community, and so I'm always happy to be a part of it. Thanks you guys for inviting me. We are in a whole bunch of snowy weather yet here, but so it's kind of hard to be thinking about gardening already, but it's time to be starting seeds. So one of the things that in my position as horticulture outreach specialist for UW Extension, this topic comes up over and over and over, and everyone is looking for the magic answers for starting good, healthy seeds and growing good transplants. And sometimes I think that it's starting to be something that's overthought and being made to be a little more complicated than it is. So my goal tonight is to show you the basics of how you can grow happy, good seedlings. Now, I brought with me little seedlings, okay, little baby tomatoes and little baby Brussels sprouts that I planted just for this class about a month ago. So these are about 4 weeks old, and we'll talk about them a little bit more as I get going here. But the bottom line is all I did was throw seeds on some soil and get them to grow, and I have a light, and that's what makes a difference here. You can see that these are dark green. And again, we're going to talk about these a little bit more as we go, but these are the guests of honor here, Brussels sprouts and baby tomatoes. Because of course, everybody here wants to start tomato seedlings, right? Because everybody grows tomatoes because there are only two things that money can't buy, right? True love and homegrown tomatoes. So 87% of gardeners grow tomatoes, and that is the most popular thing to be started indoors to plant outside once the growing season starts. Okay, so first, let's talk about what a seed is. A seed is, as you can see in the slide here, there's the seed coat, and that protects everything that's inside the seed. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that in every seed, there's a tiny baby little plant. And you've maybe seen this if you've ever cracked open a bean seed or a peanut, and you can actually see like a baby plant with little tiny leaves and stuff in there. And that's the embryo, and that is in every seed already. So part of getting good seed starting indoors is protecting that little baby plant that's in there. So remember that seeds are alive. They need to be handled appropriately. And once we start getting that little baby plant to grow, we need to keep it growing and protect it until it's up and growing out in our gardens. Okay. So seeds are, they have everything they need to grow in there. Okay. You don't have to add anything other than water to make a seed grow. Nature provides all of the food for that little baby seedling to get started. Everything's in there. Okay. And when a seed does germinate, you can see in this slide that it starts out by the seed soaking up water and it'll swell. If you've ever had garden seeds like beans or peas and you put them in water, overnight they'll be double in size. So the very first step of a seed germinating is soaking up water, and that starts all these enzymes and chemical reactions going in the seed, and that's what makes it germinate and grow. So first the seed coat will split, and then you get the little crook hanging over there that pushes up through the ground. And the cotyledons, that's kind of the major part of the seed. That's where there's stored energy for that little baby plant to get growing. But there's only so much stored energy in there. So our goal is to get that little plant above ground where green tissue can start absorbing sunlight, because that's the plants where the plant's going to get the food it needs to grow. So if you've ever had any of my classes or anything before, my number one thing I make everybody repeat out loud is, what is a plant's food? And it is not fertilizer that you put in the soil. It's carbohydrates or sugars that are made inside the plant tissue during photosynthesis in the presence of sunlight. So if your plant is not getting enough light, it's going to starve. And all the fertilizer in the world dumped on the soil is not going to help that. Okay. So our goal is to get that seed germinated and above ground to where the first little leaves can start absorbing sunlight and creating food for that plant before the food that's in the seed runs out. Okay. And then once that plant gets above ground, there'll be the first set of leaves that are called cotyledon leaves. They don't look like the adult leaves will, but then the next set of leaves that comes out will be what we call the first true leaves, and those will look like the plant is supposed to look. So at some point, I'll pass these plants around, and you'll be able to see on these tomatoes yet that the first cotyledon leaves are still on these plants, but they have now grown to the point where they're getting their second set of true leaves already that actually look like tomato leaves. So those little cotyledon leaves, they hang around for a long time, but they're very, very important to start creating food for that plant to get started. Okay. And of course, that food goes from the leaves and it helps that plant grow roots. And a good root system is what we need before we can transplant these things. So I get asked, what are the best seeds? Okay. There are tons and tons of options for seeds out there. The key is that those seeds have been handled correctly and that they're free of disease, because you can bring in diseases on seeds. So on any seed packet that you purchase, there's a bunch of information on the back. So obviously on the front, it's telling you what that vegetable is. In this case, this is a Black Beauty squash, great for slicing. It says days to harvest 63. So that tells you from the time after it germinates to the time that you can expect to be picking your plants or your vegetables. That's an estimate, okay? And a lot depends on the weather conditions, the growing conditions for how fast that plant will mature and get around to producing that fruit, okay? But it gives you an idea, okay? On the back, there are other instructions like spacing requirements. Follow those instructions, okay? So oftentimes people say, well, I can plant them closer together than that. But remember that the seed growers want you to be successful. So they have grown these things out in their nurseries, and they have determined that this is the best spacing for them. If plant them closer together, they might be competing with each other. They might be holding in humidity and therefore have more disease issues, all kinds of reasons. Okay. Follow the instructions. They're there for a reason. And then also the biggest thing, if you're in a store, for example, and you're purchasing seeds, on every seed packet, by law, they have to be germination tested. Okay. So they have to have a test that shows that they get at least a certain percentage, 90 some percent germination of all the seeds in there. And that's to protect you, the consumer, from buying a pack of seeds and nothing germinates because those seeds weren't viable when they were packaged. So there's going to be a date. And on this package, you can see it's way at the bottom next to the number 10 there. And this one says packed for 2017, I think it was, sell by December of 2017. Okay, it's an old picture that I took, right? But pay attention to that. Okay, so don't buy old seeds. The longer a seed is sitting there, that seed still has to stay alive. But even when it's dry and cool, there are low-grade chemical reactions going on in that seed, because in order to stay alive, that seed has to use some of that stored energy. So over time, that amount of energy decreases. And if the seed gets too old, it's not going to germinate for you when you plant it. Now, different species and different varieties have different lifespans for how long they can live. My understanding is when they opened King Tut's tomb, they found cornflower seeds in there, and some of them germinated. Okay. Perfect conditions for storage, right? And that, that's kind of why we can't ever seem to get rid of weeds, right? Because some of those weed seeds will remain viable in the soil for 20 years. But when you're buying garden seeds, make sure that you look at that date and make sure that your big box store didn't just store them in the back room all winter, and now they've brought out last year's seeds, and that date isn't valid anymore. Okay. So if you buy good seeds that have the appropriate date on them, you should be good to go. There are tons of places you can buy seeds, right? If you're buying vegetables, varieties that that's one thing. And I'm just going to say this, if you're standing at Walmart and just picking little flower seeds packets off the shelf for 25 cents a piece, make sure that you have a clue what you're buying, because we do find invasive species on those shelves sometimes. So, be careful of that. Specifically forget-me-nots. I don't know. Every year I find out that they're selling forget-me-nots and they're on the invasive species list in Wisconsin. So we've got to be careful of things like that. You can order your seeds. I have not ordered mine yet. I realized, oh my gosh, I should have ordered my seeds by now. But this winter is just hanging on and on and on. And with all that snow out there, mentally, I'm just not in that frame of mind yet that I should be starting seeds. But anyway, you can order them from a ton of different catalogs, a ton of different places online. So do we have a question? Okay, great. So the question is, any reason to order them versus buying them off the shelf? Yes and no. The no reason is they're not any better quality or anything like that. The yes reason is you're only going to find certain number of varieties on the shelf. They only have so much room. If you're looking for something more unique or specific, you might not be able to find it locally, and the catalogs just have a whole lot more selection. So that's the main reason. Okay. Specifically, I grow a lot of grape tomatoes because I roast them and I'm addicted to them that way. And I can't always find good enough variety of different grape tomatoes locally. So got to order them. Okay. Good question. All right. So if you're saving seeds, you can save seeds like from your own vegetables from year to year, but you got to be careful with this, okay? Because a lot of things won't come true from seed, okay? So if you're like collecting squash seeds or things like that, chances are good that the bees cross-pollinated them, and what you end up getting the next year is not going to look at all like what you started with, okay? So it's really iffy that way. There are some things though, like most tomatoes, peppers, that you can save the seeds from. And they will come pretty true because they are mostly self-fertile. And a lot of times, yeah, genetically, there's a little bit of difference, but you're not going to notice it that much. Heirloom varieties, that's how they become and stay heirlooms, right? Because people save the seeds. But make sure that you kind of know what you're saving and why. And also don't ever save anything from diseased plants. So for example, on tomatoes, there's a bacterial speck and bacterial spot diseases that can affect the fruit, and they overwinter and they can come in on the seeds. So if you save seeds from a fruit that had bacterial speck, you might very well be planting a plant with bacterial speck the next year. Okay, so you got to be a little careful of that, and that also comes into play if you're like trading seeds with someone else. You just need to make sure that you're going for from plants that didn't have diseases. Okay, if you are saving seeds from year to year. So these little baby tomatoes and Brussels sprouts that I grew, okay, I just told you I haven't ordered my seeds yet, right? But I planted these about a month ago because these were leftover seeds from last year. So they were my seeds last year. I forgot exactly what variety this is because I just threw them in here just for you guys for this class, okay? But they were stored in my garage, which stayed pretty cool in a tin. This is the greatest use for those, those tins of popcorn you get as gifts at Christmas. And then you have those tins, with the snowmen on them and stuff, and you don't know what to do with them, but they seem too nice to throw away. They make great seed storage containers because the mice can't get in them, moisture can't get in them. They're really good. So I have a big red one, and that's where I store all my seeds. So when I went to plant these, I just looked at what I had last year. And you can see that my little baby tomatoes here are very thick. So because they were year-old seeds, I thought, well, I might have less germination than if they were fresh seeds. Apparently not. I got pretty darn good germination here. And so I just sprinkled a whole bunch of them on there. But if you store seeds in a cool spot, meaning you don't want it to be getting 90 degrees, okay? It doesn't have to be 37 degrees of your refrigerator, but the cooler it is, remember that temperature affects chemical reaction rate. And as I just mentioned, in these seeds, there are chemical reactions going on. And those chemical reactions are using energy out of that seed. So the warmer a seed is stored, the faster those chemical reactions are going up. So more of this food is getting used. So they're going to be viable less length of time than if they're stored at a cooler temperature. Okay. So if they're down in the 40s or 50s or whatever, at least not 90 degrees, they're going to be good for quite a long time. And you want them to be dried, because remember the first thing I said on that, how a seed germinates, is the first thing is it soaks up water, and that water causes enzymes and chemical reactions to start cooking or start going in those seeds. So we don't want moisture in there until we want moisture in there. And it will vary by species for how long they will remain viable. Okay, so tomatoes, 4, 5, 6 years. Great. Cucumbers, I have a hard time getting them to germinate the second year. So I just buy fresh cucumber seeds every year. Other people might have more luck with that. But if you're not sure, you can just plant them thicker, okay? Or you can do a germination test where you would take like 10 seeds and put them on a wet paper towel, roll it up, put it in a Ziploc bag, put it on your kitchen countertop, and wait. And after 4 or 5 days, start peeling that open like this and take a look and see how many of those seeds germinate. Okay. So if 5 of the 10 germinate, well, then you know that you would get about 50% germination. So if you go ahead and plant those bean seeds outside, plant them twice as thick as you otherwise would have, assuming that 50% of them won't germinate. Okay. So a good way to check if old seeds are still viable and not throw them out. Sometimes it's hard, you get a favorite variety. Like I like Maxibel green beans. It's a French bean variety. So they're kind of longer and thinner. And I don't know. I started planting them years back, and I just try to plant them every year. But some years I can't find them. Some years the seed companies are out, at least by the time I get around to doing my order, because obviously I seem to be late with that. So I try to save any unplanted seeds from year to year, because why throw them out and buy new ones, right? So this is how you can test to see if you would get good germination. So I'm going to mention tomatoes, but really everything else that I talk about refers to any kind of seeds that you can be planting. So how many people in the audience here grow flower seeds as well as vegetable seeds? Okay. You can grow all those annual flowers that you go to the greenhouse and buy transplants for at home. Okay. Now, some of them take longer than a lot of our vegetables do, but so things like impatiens and geraniums should have been planted a month plus ago. But a lot of things you can still grow as flowers rather than buy them from the greenhouses. And that's a great way, again, to get certain colors and certain varieties that you want that your local greenhouse won't have as transplants available. But again, because most of the time people are planting tomatoes, I just want to mention that the question comes up when to plant the seeds. Okay. I planted these tomatoes for this class, but I would not have planted tomatoes for my garden yet. Okay. In our area, so the general rule for tomatoes is 6 to 8 weeks before you would be planting them outside. Okay. So I'll go with 8 weeks on that, which really puts us at about April Fool's Day. So every year my brother asks me, when should I plant my tomatoes? And I tell him, you're a fool if you do it before April Fool's Day. Because if you plant them too early, because of the growing conditions inside, which we'll talk about more here in a bit, they can end up long and tall and lanky, and older plants don't transplant as happily. Okay. The bigger a plant is, the more transplant shock there's going to be. Now, I know that there are also people saying, well, my mom always planted them on May 1st. And we never know what the weather will be. But for things like tomatoes and peppers, tomatoes are warm season plants, meaning they need heat. They don't like it when it's cool. So even though the danger of frost is past, if it's getting down to 40 degrees at night, they're just sitting there shivering, and that's setting them back. So you're much better off waiting until the soil temperature is at least 60 degrees and the night temperatures are not getting that cool anymore. Okay. So I suggest waiting till Memorial Day. Use Memorial Day as your plant out date for tomatoes, peppers, any of the quote warm season crops. And that puts us at planting them around April 1st. Okay. Even if your plants are tiny, you could transplant these out into the garden. They're plenty big enough. Okay. Once that heat gets going in July, these plants will catch up. Okay. So even if they're young, if it's better to have smaller plants being transplanted out, they will catch up once the heat gets going. They grow very fast in those conditions. When I was a kid, my parents were having a discussion. My mom grew her tomatoes from seed in egg cartons on the windowsill every year. And there was some discussion where my dad was contending that you don't get ahead of time by planting them out like that. I don't know the whole conversation, but one year my mom put her transplants out, and then right next to it in the same garden, she actually planted tomatoes from seed in the garden, and the transplants produced fruit only like 1 to 2 weeks faster than the ones that were planted from seed in the garden. So that just shows you that once that heat of late June and July gets going, tomatoes will catch up. So don't be in a hurry. In fact, if you plant them out early and the soil temperature is only 48, 49 degrees and the night temperatures are in the 40s, those plants will just sit there. They won't put on any growth, because at that with those conditions, tomatoes, those chemical reactions again are not going very fast in that plant, and they're going to be stunted. Okay. Now, cool season plants, such as my baby Brussels sprouts here. I never got my Brussels sprouts planted last year, so that's why I had a full packet of leftover to pour in here. But things like Brussels sprouts and broccoli and cauliflower and kale and stuff like that, that can handle those cooler temperatures, so they can go out earlier. They can go out even mid-April if our conditions are right. Now, my yard, there's at least 2 feet of snow to melt yet. So by the time the snow gets melted and the soil dries out enough and the soil warms up enough, I don't think I'm putting these Brussels sprouts in my garden in middle of April this year. So if they get out May 1st, they can handle a little bit of light frost. They can handle cooler night temperatures. Okay. And they'll be okay, but not the warm season crops like the tomatoes or peppers. Okay, so the question is, do the cool season crops need to be covered if it freezes? Not necessarily. They can handle frost actually getting on there. Things like peas, even, which are a cool season crop. My mom always said the best peas are the ones that get snowed on. And they can handle that a little bit. Now, if it, got like record low temperatures of, 0 or something like that, well, even the cool season crops would be damaged, but they can handle some frost and they can handle barely below freezing. Yeah. Okay, so look at about Memorial Day for your plant out date, and that's going to put us at around for April Fool's Day for planting tomatoes. Now, if you are seeding things indoors that are other warm season crops that we only grow indoors for a shorter period of time, like squash or pumpkins or melons, that kind of thing, typically we want those to be planted indoors only about 4 weeks before transplanting outside. And the main reason for that is because the bigger the plant, the bigger the transplant shot. And those vine crops are really hard to transplant. They don't like it. So the younger they are, the better. So in that case, again, we'd be looking at that Memorial Day time frame for planting them outside. So those you wouldn't be planting till like the end of April if you're seeding them indoors. Okay. And again, part of it will depend on the conditions that you have to grow them in indoors, which we'll talk about a little bit more here shortly, on whether or not, you should have it maybe a week or two longer or a week or two shorter for planting yours indoors. So the basics to success, okay? Seed to soil contact. When you plant your seed, we need to make sure that they're in contact with soils, even moisture, good light, and the appropriate temperature. It's simple, right? Just those 4 easy things are all you need to know to grow great little seedling transplants, okay, indoors. So we're going to talk about all of this, but again, I don't want anybody to make it too complicated. Now, how many of you are on Facebook and follow some gardening groups on Facebook? Okay. So I lurk on some of them because for my job, I kind of want to see what people are saying and stuff out there. And one of the other things that I've started doing are some programs that address some of the gardening myths that are out there. Okay. So gardening I used to call it barstool wisdom when my dad used to come home with all these great ideas. Now it's Facebook wisdom, and it's a great platform for people to share. I heard that. Okay. And I always brace myself when people start with, I heard that, because they don't know where they heard it. But gardening is a great source for passing down information that has been heard from other gardeners. And in a lot of cases, that's great, right? That's how we survived as a species, was somebody figuring out how to grow crops and passing that knowledge around. But there's also a lot of not so great information out there, and some of it is harmless, okay? But some of it is not. Some of it can actually do harm. How many of you have heard that you should save your eggshells all winter and crush them up and put them in the hole when you plant your tomatoes to prevent blossom end rot? Myth, not going to help at all. And in fact, if you build up too much calcium in your soil, that can interfere with your plant's ability to take up magnesium out of the soil. So, and typically it's not in Wisconsin, it is not a lack of calcium in your soil that's causing blossom end rot, but that one is out there all over the place. Um, there's tons of them. Okay. One of them that I see a lot for doing seedlings is to sprinkle cinnamon on the soil surface to prevent damping off. And cinnamon is not a powerful fungicide, and the organism that causes damping off is not at all affected by cinnamon. There's some fungus that is affected by cinnamon, but it's not this one. Okay, so my point is that you don't need to be looking for all these little tricks and things that are being out there. You just need to do the basics here, and you'll be fine. Okay, so let's start with soil. Oh my gosh, I have a seed starty little typo there. Okay, so the first thing is you need some kind of a container. Now you can tell that what I used here was a carry-out container. Okay, you take your food home from the restaurant in, and that works great. All you need is something that's about 2 inches deep. This is a Culver's fish dinner carry-out thing. It's what I'm going to plant some stuff in this year soon because this is a great size. It's got a plastic dome on it and everything. But you can buy stuff. There's all kinds of options in the store for seed starting, right? There are cool things like this little Jiffy greenhouse thing. It fits nicely on a windowsill. This particular one has these little peat moss compressed discs. So you just put them in here and you soak them and they expand up, and there's your soil stuff in there. Okay. You can use whichever system works for you. I don't spend money on stuff like this because my carry-out things work just fine. But what you do need, and there is no exception for this, is seed starting mix. Okay. You want something that's actually called seed starting mix because it's sterile. Okay. You never, ever, ever want to use old soil like out of a pot or a container or garden soil because with that comes diseases. And these little tiny baby seedlings are going to be pretty susceptible. So your main investment has to be your seeds and sterile seed starting mix. Now, this is a package of Miracle Grow. I actually don't like this because this comes with fertilizer already in it, and I would rather it didn't have that. Okay. There are seed starting mixes out there that are basically finely milled peat moss. And forever and ever and ever, I used a brand called Jiffy Mix. When I bought this bag, obviously I couldn't find Jiffy Mix. Miracle Grow is everywhere. Okay. This works, but you don't need the fertilizer in it. And I would prefer to control my fertilizer myself. But whatever, you need a seed starting mix. Regular stuff that's labeled potting soil might have some other compost and stuff in it. It might be a little coarser. If you had to use it, okay, you have to use it, right? But try to buy seed starting mix. The beauty is that you don't really need a lot of this stuff, right? So if you look at my little tomato thing here, what are there, about maybe 3 cups of potting mix in here? So you don't need to buy a big bag of this stuff, but it's an absolutely important investment. Okay. So you can use anything for your container. Like I said, carry out containers. You can even use toilet paper rolls. Okay. So paper cups. These things, you can just either set them all in a tray, or you can put a little piece of tape on the bottom. You can cut them in half so they're not quite as deep. Fill them with your sterile seed starting mix. And these are great because the cardboard will get wet and it'll start to break down by the time 8 weeks are up and you're ready to plant it. But then you can just kind of like peel the sides away and put your whole thing in the garden. And this is sustainable, right? What a better way to recycle paper than to use it for planting. Okay, you can buy the cells, that are like 1.5 inch square that look just like the kind that you buy in the greenhouse and stuff like that. Again, whatever works for you. Okay, but it doesn't have to cost money. And look for ways to recycle things, because hey, that's what gardening is all about. When the time comes, you're not going to plant this directly in the ground anyway. Now, if you use peat cups, peat pots, that's the word I'm looking for, okay, that are just pressed peat. Even with those, it's good if you like rip open the sides when you put the plant in so that the roots can grow out freely. And these little discs that are in my planting thing here, they, you can just put that whole thing in the ground, but again, rip the sides open. But anything can be a seed starting thing. All you need is about 2 inches and you put your seed starting mix in there. Okay. Egg cartons. I think I mentioned that. My mom always used egg cartons when I was a kid and they worked really good. So, here are some pictures of some other of the supplies. What you also need is a misting bottle. Okay. Oops. Sorry. I had it set on stream because I was training cats. It is. I have a cat problem. These are the main supplies that you need. And the process is you just fill your little container. Okay. So you put the planting mix in here. Be sure that you moisten it before you do this, because like that bag has been sitting in my garage for a year. Okay, it's leftover from last year and it's gotten really dry. It's way better if you get it well moistened before you start planting, because if you're trying to moisten it after the seeds are in there, that can be a bit of a problem. So I would just like put it in a pail or something like that, add a bunch of water, let it sit for half an hour, mix it around, make sure that it's damp before you use it. Okay. You put it in your container, whatever container you're choosing. Okay. Your cup, your toilet paper roll, your Culver's carryout thing. And then you put your seeds on top. Okay. Now, here are a couple of things that you should do. You'll notice that in here, it's tomatoes and only tomatoes. It's even one variety of tomatoes. Those are all Brussels sprouts. Okay. It's better if in each container you only plant one species or one variety, even, because they will germinate at different rates. And that's really important. Okay. And that'll become a little more clear here in a second. But we want things to germinate evenly, because as soon as they germinate, we're going to change what we're doing with them. So that's the beauty of using these kinds of things, because typically I wouldn't plant them this thick, right? I would probably have planted maybe 6 or 7 of them in here. I don't need even 6 or 7 of the same variety of tomato for my use, right? I'd end up then transplanting maybe 3 of them into my garden, but I might have 4 or 5 of these, each with a different variety in them for my personal use. Okay. And that's what's great about using things like this. Obviously, these you can do however many you want. Okay. So you put your seed on top and then you sprinkle an even amount of potting mix over those seeds. I like to use this. This is my little kitchen strainer. It works perfect. I put a little potting mix on it and just tap it and cover those seeds ever so slightly, about 1/8 of an inch. Now, the reason this works so good is, again, we want each seed to be buried at the same depth because we want them to all germinate at the same time. We don't want one germinating today and it be 5 days until the next one, which was buried deeper, finally makes it above the soil line. Okay. So we want them to all be evenly buried so that they germinate at the same rate. And then remember, our potting mix will already be moist, but that's when you just do a slight mist over the top to moisten that potting mix that you sprinkled over the top and to make sure those seeds are wet. Okay. Because remember, step one is for that seed to soak up water. Okay. Then that's where your little covers come in. And if you don't have a little cover like this, you can use plastic wrap or anything. And the only reason we're doing this little dome is to keep those seeds from drying out. Okay. It's not a greenhouse. So, and here's my pet peeve. If you look at the advertising on this, they have these green plants growing under that plastic dome. Nope, that's not how it works. You never want the green leaves under the plastic dome. So this little plastic dome would stay on here up until the seeds start to germinate. The second, and I mean the second, you see any little green popping up from your seeds, and the first thing you're going to see is the little crook in the stem that's pushing up through the soil. The second you see that, this dome comes off. Okay? Because at that point, because you buried all your seeds and treated them all the same, the other ones may not have shown up yet. It might take them another day or two, but they've soaked up all the moisture. They've started the germination process. They're going to come up. Okay. But if you leave this on, it's too humid in there. And that's when you're going to get fungal diseases. Okay. At this point, we want the soil moist and the air dry. So the dome or the plastic, whatever it is that you've done, comes off. Now, in the meantime, for getting those seeds to germinate, having the soil, where the seed is warm, is really, really a useful thing. Okay, so you can put them, once you plant your seeds and you've got them in your dome, put them in a warm place in your house. Okay. If that soil is about 75 to 85 degrees, that's good because, again, we're trying to get that seed to germinate as quickly as possible. And once it's soaked up the water and the chemical reactions are happening, chemical reactions happen faster at warmer temperatures. So warm soil is really, really helpful to get them to germinate quickly. You can buy one of these. It's called a seed starting mat, and you plug it in and you lay it flat and you put your containers on there, and it will warm the soil without warming the air. Okay. You don't need this. If you have it, somebody gives it to you as a gift, great. If you have in-floor heat, that's wonderful. My mom always used to put hers on the top of the refrigerator because that was a warmer area. But even if it's just in your household temperatures of 72 degrees, your seeds will germinate. It just might take a day or two longer than if you had this. Not a big deal. Okay. All right. So you mist and you cover the dome, keep it moist till germination. 70 to 85 degrees until they germinate, depending on what it is you're growing, 4 to 12 days. My little Brussels sprouts came up in like 3.5 days. My tomatoes came up in about 6 days. It all depends on the seeds. And that bottom heat, again, can help with germination. And then you remove that plastic container. So you can see in this picture here, all the moisture that builds up underneath that is exactly what fungus wants. Now, the biggest disease that seedlings get is called damping off. I think it's actually a water mold, but it gets on the surface of the soil and it like strangles the stem right at soil level, and your whole plant just goes pshh, and it happens like that. Within a day, it can start on one end and just creep across the whole tray and kill them all. And it is heartbreaking. Okay. That's the main disease that you're going to have any problems with little seedlings. And we need to prevent that. So getting the humidity down, ideally, once these little seedlings are up, you take that dome off and you would put these plants now under light and with a fan on them. You have a little oscillating fan, or this is where singing to your plants is useful. You know, you go and you visit them every day and you blow on them and you sing to them. That actually would blow some of these fungal spore things away, but it also creates air movement, and that's a good thing. Okay. So again, we want the top to be lower humidity. Damping off is our biggest problem. Now, the thing is, when you look at these are 4 weeks old. How many of you are thinking, wow, those are nice, short, stocky little plants for 4 weeks old? They are. And that's because I've had them in the room that's above my garage, which is always cool because it's got walls on 4 sides. And I've had them under lights, grow lights. Okay. So the worst conditions for growing seedlings are low light and warm temperatures. And even if you have them on a sunny windowsill in your living room, that light is not as bright as you think. Our eyes think, oh, it's full sun. That's really bright, but it's not. If you actually put a light meter there for lumens, the light on the outside of the window is way higher than the light on the inside of the windows, because our windows have all these glazings and stuff on it to keep our furniture from fading and energy loss and all that kind of a thing. Plus that day length, February, March in Wisconsin, our sun angle is still on the low side and our day length isn't that long. Okay. So if you really want to grow good, healthy, stocky plants, you need supplemental light. Now, you don't need to. My mom never had supplemental lights all the time I was growing up. You're just going to have taller, little lankier plants, but they will grow once you transplant them out into the garden, and they will produce tons of tomatoes. So it's not like you have to have some elaborate setup. Okay. The cool thing is these days, there are all kinds of great LED grow lights available. So this is kind of a game changer now. This is one I just bought. I haven't set it up yet. The lights that I've been growing this under was just kind of like what's above our heads here. It's just a fluorescent tube. Okay. But there's all kinds of LED lights and configurations that you can bend and move around and everything. And I say, so, invest in something like this. Is probably going to last you forever. But there's lots of options out there now if you want to grow stockier, sturdier plants. But if you have sunny windowsills, you can still grow seedlings indoors. Okay. So high light or high heat and low light results in those lanky seed transplants. Now, the problem with your living room windowsill is, right now that sun is starting to get a little warmer. And if you have south-facing windows, your living room can get up to 74, 75 degrees on in the afternoon. And that's getting too warm. Okay. And what we ideally want is 65 to 68 degrees. They can go up to 70, 73 in the morning or in the day. But if we can get that temperature to drop at night, that's even better. So when they grow in greenhouses, you think, oh, but it's always so warm in the greenhouses. It's really not. As soon as that temperature starts getting up there, the vents open on the roof of the greenhouses, the fans kick on, and the research shows there's something called DIF. It's DIF. It actually stands for difference between day and night temperatures. But when they grow transplants that you buy in the greenhouses, okay, they're often cheating. Okay. They want the plants to be short and sturdy, right? But they want them short because it's easier for them to ship them and put them into trucks and stuff. So they actually treat their plants with plant growth regulators that keep them short. They still develop, they get physiologically mature, but the inner nodes, the space between the sets of leaves, stays shorter. Okay. You can do that also by manipulating the temperature. And if the daytime temperature is like 71, 72, and at night it goes down to like 66 or 67, that difference in day and night temperature will also keep the inner nodes shorter on the plants. And that's how you get shorter, stockier plants too. Okay. So cooler and brighter is going to make for stockier, healthier transplants. But again, even if they're a little stretched out, they're still going to produce for you. Okay. The other thing is that when you're watering them, obviously these things have little root systems and they need to be kept evenly moist. So you don't want them to get to the point where they're wilting because that can really set them back. All right. I will tell you that this little tray of tomatoes did reach wilting a few days ago and they perked up. So I didn't let them wilt for too long. But you also want that very surface to dry out between waterings because, again, that damping off organism likes moisture. If that surface is allowed to dry out before you water it, you're not going to have damping off disease problems. Okay. You're also not likely going to have fungus gnats. So natural light, south-facing windows are best. If you don't have artificial light or supplemental light, your plants will do like in this picture, they'll lean towards the light, okay? There's a plant hormone in there called auxin that is affected by the light, and it makes the cells on the dark side of the plants elongate more, and that pushes the plant towards the light. So if you have this, just turn them around every day. Every day when you check them to water them and you sing to them a little bit, just spin them around so that they go back the other way. Also make sure that depending on your window situation, that window doesn't get too cold at night. I remember my mom having red leaves on her plants on the windowsills. Well, we lived in an old farmhouse that did not have energy efficient windows. Okay. And I know now that was because of it getting too cold at night, and that affected phosphorus uptake. So it was symptoms of phosphorus deficiency caused by cold nights because those windows were a little too cool. Okay. So be sure that the windowsill doesn't get too cool at night and that the room temperature doesn't get too warm during the day. Here's the artificial light kinds of things. Fluorescent bulbs are great. You don't need a grow light or anything. Just a basic cool fluorescent bulb is enough. You can get these LED lights now like crazy. The key is to make sure that light is no more than 4 inches above the plants. Okay, so my little lights at home were about here. If you do have a light meter, and by the way, you can download light meters on your smartphone, and then you can measure how much light is coming out and stuff. There's several of them out there that are free. You want 2,000 to 3,000 lumens, and 16 to 20 hours a day. And I really would probably say more like 16 to 18 hours a day. So if you can put them on a timer, have them shut off for a while because they need to sleep too. They need some dark time in there. Okay, so my timer is set to be on all day long, comes on at like 5 a.m. and goes off at like 10:30-ish or so that they do get some dark time as well. The watering, again, you need to be really careful before the plants germinate, that when you water, you don't dislodge that seed. Okay. That's why using the mister and then just covering them with the dome until they're up. But even when they're really tiny, make sure you don't go in there with a watering can and, move the soil around and damage the roots or anything. You can, whatever you use like this, I've got some holes poked in the bottom in case I overwater, right? I don't want them standing soaked in water either. So you can can set this in a tray of water and let it seep up. You can water that way if you want. No more than 30 minutes. Remember, roots need oxygen, so you can't have that soil too wet. Like I said, try not to let them wilt before you water. So check them every day. And remember too that if they're on a sunny window, every day that we go from now on, that sun is getting stronger and the day is getting longer, so they will dry out faster. Okay. If you overwater and you don't let that surface dry out, you might have these little critters show up, fungus gnats. Okay. These are little, they look like fruit flies. All of a sudden, you'll start seeing these little things flying around in your house. And they lay their eggs on the soil mix, the larva, tiny, you don't really see them, but they feed on the organic matter in the soil mix, and then they pupate and hatch out as these flies. So if you're getting fungus gnats in your house, whether it's on your house plants or your seedlings, you're overwatering. Okay. And all you got to do is stop overwatering and they'll go away. Remember that too much humidity can cause disease, but not enough humidity can also cause some brown tips and stuff like that. So if you're getting any kind of little brown tips on your seedlings, make sure that you're not letting them get too dry between waterings, but also if you have some kind of a fan or air movement on it, you might want to back off on that. And you might want to just consider what the humidity level is in your house. Fertilizing. So you don't need to, this is why I don't like the fertilizer seed starting mix. You don't need to fertilize these until they get like their first to second set of true leaves. And then you want to start fertilizing them. You can use a liquid fertilizer, but mix it at like half strength for what it says. Okay. And don't do it every watering. Do it like once a week. If you over fertilize, you can singe these tender little roots, and we don't want massive growth, remember? So don't over fertilize. You can also use a slow release granular like this Osmocote. You just sprinkle some on the surface. Then every time you water, a little bit of fertilizer gets released. So that might be easier for you to do. Okay. So fertilize like every other week. Don't try to be pushing massive growth with lots of fertilizer. All right, so another thing that I wanted to mention was winter sowing. Because this is all over social media and a lot of people are doing it. How many of you have done winter sowing? Okay, how many of you have never heard of winter sowing? Okay, so winter sowing means sowing seeds in winter and outdoors in winter. Okay, so what you do is you use a jug. Okay, and it's really simple. You basically, this is for when you don't have enough room inside to start all the seeds that you want to start inside, or you don't have a light set up or a good windowsill. And so what you do is you take a plastic jug, like a milk jug or a kitty litter jug, you cut it like this, poke some holes in the bottom, put your potting mix in here, plant your seeds, everything exactly the same way that we just talked about. And then you close it back up, tape it shut, and you go stick it in the snowbank. And take the lid off, okay, because we don't want this to be a greenhouse that heats up in there. This is for cool season or cool tolerant plants. So you can do this for flowers that would maybe self-seed outside, or things like snapdragons. You could do this with the broccoli and cauliflower, stuff like that. You cannot do this for warm season plants like tomatoes and peppers and squash. But the idea behind this is that the plants, the seeds will germinate when the time is right based on the temperatures. They'll start growing in here. They'll have some protection, and eventually, and they'll be getting full natural light. So you don't need that supplemental light thing. And eventually you can open this all up and you'll have your little seedlings in here and you can transplant them into your garden. Okay. Very, very easy. If anybody wants to try it, I have a cat problem. I have a whole lot of these. And so if anybody wants some of these, you can take this one, and I've got some more in my car. You can follow me out. Okay. You water it at first, and then you do check them periodically to make sure that it's not getting too dry in there. But because the lid is off, snow and rain will go in there some. And so you might have to do some watering, but probably not a lot. Okay. So here are the pictures for it. Again, just like I explained, just make sure that your bottom part of your thing is at least 4 inches deep and stick it in a snowbank. A fun thing for kids to do. Okay. So, yeah, this just kind of explains what I already said. So once the temperatures are good enough, you can take that lid all the way off, and then that helps to harden those plants off even better for the transplanting into your garden. And now, winter sowing, the month would be now. Now is a great time to be doing winter sowing. People have had these things outside for a month already, and they're just sitting there. Nothing's germinating yet. But yep, you do it in winter, and it's still winter out there. So, yeah, for a while. Okay, so transplanting, when you transplant things out, you can, like these little tomatoes, they can't continue to grow in here. Not only are they too thick and competing with each other, but if I only had like 3 of them in here, I'd leave them in here right until I put them out into the garden. Okay, but you can transplant them into bigger pots or bigger containers. The key is when you do it, make sure that you don't break stems off. So use like a popsicle stick and use that to like lift the seedlings out. And if you hold them by a leaf rather than a stem, if you break that leaf off, it's not going to kill the little plant. If you break the stem off, you kill the whole little plant. So this is the way to then dig it in and put it in a bigger pot all by itself, or right out into the garden, depending on where you're transplanting. But lift them out rather than trying to detangle them. The other thing is that you could just thin them. So let's say I didn't have 50 of them in here like I do, but I had, multiples, and I just need to thin it. Rather than pulling them up, because that'll dislodge the one next to it, just take a scissors and nip them off right at soil level. And that's going to be better for the ones that are left behind. Okay. I know it's hard sometimes, but, and then when you do plant things out, you make sure that you harden them off, and hardening them off is about a 2-week process. So these little tomatoes would go outside in the shade the first couple of days, because the sun is too strong. The shade is still brighter than it is in the house. Okay, so they'd go outside, they get used to wind, that sort of thing. Then they would go to where they'd get morning sun from like 9 to 9:30. And then every day you add like 15 minutes to that. And after they've been out in the sun for about 4 hours a day, then they're able to be transplanted out. So hardening off is about a 2-week process. When you do plant them outdoors, do it like in the evening or on a cloudy day. Planting them out in the full sun in the middle of the day, or when they've got a hot sunny day ahead of them, is the worst thing to do, because you're going to break off some roots and they're going to have transplant shock. So do it when the evaporation won't be as bad. Okay. And that's it. Questions? 3 minutes. Anybody have questions? I know we answered a few during it. Are there any virtual questions? Okay. So everybody. Okay. So the question is there any fertilizer I like better than others? No. Don't get hung up on brands. It's more about analysis. So again, this is Miracle Grow. Not that I am a proponent of Miracle Grow, but it's kind of all we can find sometimes. But on here somewhere, there's going to be the analysis of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that's in here. Some of them will also have some trace minerals in it. Just get something that's kind of well balanced. This says all-purpose plant food. It's going to be again, it's not really food, it's fertilizer. Food is carbohydrates from photosynthesis, but it is, whether it's a brand name or a name that you've not necessarily heard of, it's probably going to be fine. Yeah. So I don't have a brand that's better than another. Yes, question. Good. Question is fish emulsion. Fish emulsion is a great fertilizer. It's organic. It's basically, as it says, emulsified fish. Okay, but it's a well balanced fertilizer. It's usually certified organic. The only challenge with it is it smells like fish. And so if you're growing seedlings in your house, especially if they're on your living room windowsill, you're not going to want to sit in the living room and watch TV for a day after you fertilize. So that's just a little bit of a trade-off there. But yep. But it is a good fertilizer. Good question. And yeah, the cats probably would love it too. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Does the sink or float method work for determining if old seeds are still good?
Sink or float method for determining if old seeds are good. It doesn't really work on vegetable seeds that much because they're so tiny. So that's a really good thing to use, like if you were seeing if acorns or hickory nuts or butternuts or something, because a weevil gets in them, chews out some of the seed, and then there's air in there, and that's what makes them float. So floating vegetable seeds, not really going to be effective. Yeah. Any other questions?
How can I convince people that the little seedlings that you buy that are inexpensive are better than the $5 plants?
Okay, so the question is how to convince people that buying smaller seedlings is better than the big $5 plants and stuff. That's a really, really good point. So what's important on whether your plant and when it's going to produce, because that's really our goal here, right, is to get production, whether it's flowers or fruits, like on the tomatoes. The goal is to get that production, right? And that's all determined on the plant's age. I shouldn't say age, okay? That's determines on the plant's physical maturity. So short, stocky plants, if there are 4 sets of true leaves on here, are just as physically mature as a 10-inch plant that has 4 sets of leaves on it. It's just that the internode, the space between each set of leaf, hasn't stretched out as much. Okay. And these plants have to get so many sets of leaves before they'll start flowering and producing what we want. Okay. So you can get tomatoes on short, stocky plants. But like I said earlier, short, stocky plants are going to have a good stocky root system too, and they're going to be more able to handle that transplant shock. So if you are spending extra money and getting that bigger plant, you're not likely going to get tomatoes anytime faster. And that's the same with, planting trees. Tree spading in a big old tree, it's going to take it 5 years before it gets established and starts growing again. Whereas planting a bare root tree that's half that size will probably grow even faster. So yeah, it's a hard sell because it seems like that bigger plant should be producing tomatoes faster.
I have a question.
Yes, question.
So is it healthier for bees and butterflies and pollinators to start their plants from seeds than to buy from nursery?
Okay.
I mean, are there chemicals in the nursery process that are
Okay.
dangerous to the
That's a great question. So the question is it better for bees and pollinators to start your plants from seed rather than buy transplants from greenhouses because of the concern that those plants were treated with some kind of chemicals, insecticides? Okay. So it's a little bit of a hard question to answer. However, I will say this. The biggest concern where this all came to be an issue, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago, is there's an insecticide called imidacloprid. And it was put like on the soil and then taken up by the plant in order to kill things like aphids and scale that would get on the plants and stuff. Okay. So the controversy is, so first off, most greenhouses no longer do that. Okay. So most of them have stopped that practice. Okay. Second, it is something that gets outgrown. Okay. Third, imidacloprid supposedly does not go into the reproduction parts of the plant. So there's not really any strong indication that it gets into the pollen of that it would be doing. But that research is variable. Okay. So I guess I guess I wouldn't be super concerned about it. Also, when you let's say you buy a tomato plant. So most tomatoes are self-fertile. They pollinate by wind and just shaking. Bumblebees shaking those flowers, help it along. But if you buy a little plant that has no flowers on it yet, and you put it in your garden and you grow it, and it's a month later before it's flowering, your plant is not likely going to have anything in any concentration that's going to hurt insects. Okay. So it's a great question. I think it's less of a concern now than it was 10 years ago. And there's no absolute answer for it. Okay.
Thinking, when some of the places they have these great flowers and they look pretty and you get spring fever and you want to spray looking flowers and
Yeah.
what chemicals
Yeah.
are in there that can affect your pollen.
Yeah. And that's true. Like if you're buying flowers and they're already in bloom, it's a little different, but you should look, because I've seen a lot of them now, they actually label them and they say no neonicotinoids used. And again, because this came out like, I don't know how many years ago with COVID, time really flew, but maybe like 10 years ago where this became a big issue. So the greenhouses stopped using a lot of that stuff. So, yeah. Yes.
I've heard that cultivars, because of the practices they've gone through, that they lack a lot of nectar and nutrition in their flowers. Flowers might be more beautiful, but they'd have less food value for pollinators, etc.
Okay. So the question is, some of the cultivars that have been bred to have bigger, beautiful flowers might not have as much nutritious nectar and pollen for the pollinators as they used to. I think that is true in some cases, but not all cases. A lot of some of the cultivars are downright sterile, and part of that is they just don't produce the pollen and the nectar. But it's kind of one of those things where we really have to keep a balance. Okay, so there's no reason we shouldn't have some big, beautiful flowers and still be able to provide for the pollinators. Okay. If you're planting a big old petunia, okay, that petunia isn't native to here anyway, right? We're growing it for our benefit. And if the bees visit it and they get some pollen and stuff, that's great. Okay. But we should also be giving consideration to what kinds of flowering shrubs and perennials and native plants that we're planting in other parts of our yards and gardens that are producing all that great nectar and nutrition for the pollinators. Okay. So it's not one or the other, and I think we should keep that in mind, that we can have both. I think we should always keep that in mind. But just because a plant is not native or might be lower quality and we love it, doesn't mean we shouldn't have it and enjoy it, right? So it's one of those philosophical discussions we could have for hours. Anybody else? No, go ahead.
Well, it's more about different plants, because I don't know about tomatoes in my house. Okay. So I've been planting little seedlings of carrots, and I tried to put them in the garden last year, and some of them did fine, and some not so great, and I think it's because their root is so deep. But I'm wondering, is it better for carrot seedlings to be replanted, or, and I do have them in a pot that's deeper, so I thought they could also maybe just grow. I don't know what you.
Yeah. So the question is about growing seedlings of certain things like carrots and transplanting them. And there are some plants that just don't like transplanting, and most root crops are among those. So that would be carrots and beets and things like that. And I think one of the main reasons is that there's that big taproot, right? And there's little root hairs on that carrot, but not a big extensive root system. And so when you do that transplanting, physically, a lot of those little root hairs get damaged off. And so they struggle with that. So we don't typically try to transplant them, but you can, yes, grow them in a pot. Okay, and keep them in there all year until harvest, a nice deep pot. Or you can just seed them directly in the garden. And there are different varieties, some that grow faster than others. And obviously, you can start harvesting them even when they're not full grown, because baby carrots are really tasty, right? But there are just some things that don't like transplanting. We never used to transplant the vine crops like melons and squash and stuff, because they do struggle with it. But now, if they're in a bigger pot and they're seeded right like in that 4-inch pot or whatever, and you're careful, you can get them transplanted. And with our short growing season, that can be beneficial, but sometimes, it's better to just direct seed them. Anybody else? Our time is probably up then.
Can you tell them about the library seed library?
I can. All right. So the River Falls Library is going to be doing a seed library. So this is really exciting. It's going to start on May 15th. And there's going to be 5 different types of easy to grow seed packets while they last. So some green beans, cucumbers, peas, squash, and lettuce seeds. And these are all ones that you wouldn't start ahead of time, like what we've been talking about, but that you would directly sow into the soil. And then there's also going to be a variety of extra seed that are donated, and maybe even some tomato and pepper seedlings here. So you want to check this out. It's a partnership with the Pierce County Public Health and Nutrition and River Falls Garden Club, which provided these seed packets and stuff. So that's really cool. There are other seeds donated by some seed companies like Fedco, Fairy Morse, and Hudson Valley Seeds. And it's geared towards people who are low income and new to gardening. So if you're new to gardening and you want to try some of these easy to grow seeds, you are more than welcome to come on in and get some. And then there's also going to be having a class on May 31st on how to plant a small garden. So if you've not gardened much in the future, this will be a hands-on in-person class. And seeds and plants will be planted in the entry gardens on the Union Street side of the library. And there'll be time for gardening questions and sharing stories and learning about if some of these myths are true or not, and things like that. So, we good? Is that it?
Is there a time that happens to be
6:30.
6:30 on May 31st. The May 15th is when the seeds will be at the library here. So that's just like when the library's open. Yeah. Okay.
I've got one more quick question.
Yeah.
When you mentioned soil temperature, if you have a raised garden, not necessarily in the ground, but some of those ones that look like a feeding trough, and the soil is, you put soil in there, is that gonna warm up faster?
Okay, the question is, do raised beds warm up faster for soil temperature? And yes, they do. They warm up faster in the spring. They usually dry out a little faster as well. So you can get things planted in there a little bit sooner, but the air temperature will be the same. So those night temperatures will still be getting cool. So you want to be careful about those warm season crops. Yep.
Also with the raised bed or like the trough style, isn't it also that they get colder easier? Like so if it gets freezier like the soil?
So those raised beds also, the question is, do they get colder? And yes, they do, which is why we don't really put perennial things in them, because the roots will freeze colder in the winter. During the growing season, it's not really an issue, but it's more that a raised bed, we don't want to put perennial things in there because the roots will freeze at a lower level than flat gardens, and that could kill them. Yep. All right. All right. Seems like there was something